Welcome to Something About Sleep. We hope you'll let our stories guide you to a nice, peaceful slumber as you learn about history and what it was like to be a human in times long since past. Now, I need to get to sleep, and if you're watching this video, chances are you do too. So, without further ado, take it away.
Thank you, sir. What might it have felt like to wake before sunrise in a town where every book had passed through human hands, line by careful line, and where a university did not yet look like a university at all? There are no broad lawns waiting beyond your window. There is no single gate through which every scholar must pass. No row of lecture halls gathered neatly around a courtyard, and no library filled with identical printed volumes. The place outside your shutters is a living medieval town, already old enough to have acquired its own habits and shadows. Its streets twist between brick walls and timbered upper stories. Towers rise against a sky that is still almost black. Covered walkways run beneath the houses, their columns disappearing one after another into the dimness. Somewhere beyond them, hidden behind shutters and walls, ovens are beginning to warm. For the moment, however, the town remains quiet. A candle is burned low in a rented upper room. Its flame leans slightly whenever a draught finds the edge of the shutters. On a small writing surface nearby rests a quill, a folded sheet, and a book that is not quite a book in the familiar modern sense. It may be a bound manuscript, carefully copied and corrected. It may be only a gathering of leaves, or a set of notes made from a master's reading. Whatever form it takes, it is valuable enough to be placed out of reach of spilled water and careless elbows. Its pages carry the patient work of other people, the preparation of parchment or paper, the ruling of lines, the mixing of ink, the motion of a pen, the checking of words, and perhaps the addition of notes in the margins. The room belongs for now to a student far from home. We do not need to give him a name. There is no need to invent a dramatic story around him. He is simply one of the many people who have come to Bologna in search of learning during the later years of the 13th century. He may have travelled from another Italian city, crossing hills and river valleys along the road, or he may have come from farther away, from lands beyond the Alps, bringing with him unfamiliar accents, letters of introduction, a few practical possessions, and the knowledge that home is not close enough to reach in an afternoon. He is not necessarily young. Bologna's reputation for law attracted many mature students, including men who already held responsibilities in church or civic life. Some had servants and money enough to arrange comfortable lodgings. Others lived with much greater simplicity. The room we enter tonight is modest but not miserable. It contains what is needed: a place to sleep, a chest, a blanket, a basin, a cloak, a few coins, something to write with, and a text that will shape the coming day. Outside, damp air settles beneath the portico. The covered walkway belongs to the building above it, yet it serves the passing public below. During the busier hours it will shelter merchants, residents, students, servants, craftsmen, and visitors. For now, it holds only the smell of cool brick and wood, a faint trace of smoke, and the sound of an occasional step moving through the darkness. This is the hour when a town feels both intimate and mysterious. The shops are shuttered, but the work of the day has not entirely ceased. A baker may already be tending an oven. Someone may be carrying water through a side street. Somewhere a door opens, pauses, and closes again. A horse shifts its weight in a stable. A low voice travels briefly through an arcade and then disappears. Above the roofs, the outlines of towers stand quietly against the fading stars. Tonight, or perhaps this morning, we will spend one slow day in this university town. We will move from the first grey light to the last candle. We will follow the covered streets as they fill with ordinary life. We will sit for a while in a room where a teacher reads from an inherited legal text and pauses to explain the meaning folded inside a difficult phrase. We will pass booksellers and copyists, rented lodgings and simple meals, student associations and quiet conversations. As evening settles, we will return beneath the arcades and climb once more to the small room where the day began. Our setting is mainly Bologna in the late 13th century. Other medieval universities developed in their own ways, and we should not imagine that a day in Bologna could stand perfectly for a day in Paris, Oxford, or every other place of learning. Bologna had a character of its own. Its studium, the community of study from which the university grew, was deeply woven into the city. Teaching took place in rooms scattered through the town. Students organised themselves in associations. The life of learning depended not only on masters and manuscripts, but also on landlords, cooks, stationers, copyists, messengers, porters, and the many other people whose work made a student's day possible. Before we step outside, take a moment to notice where you're listening from tonight. Perhaps your own room is quiet. Perhaps the day has ended where you live, while somewhere else the morning is beginning. Leave a comment with the place you're listening from and the time in your part of the world. And if these slow journeys through history help you rest, you're always welcome to like the video, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more relaxing history. For now, there is nothing else you need to do. The town can wake gradually. A distant bell sounds at last. It does not shatter the silence. It simply enters it, one measured note at a time, passing over the roofs and down between the walls. The student stirs, the low candle trembles, and beyond the shutters the darkness begins to soften into the first grey light of morning. As the sky lightens, Bologna begins to reveal itself in layers. From the upper room, the town first appears as a collection of shapes, roof lines pressed close together, narrow lanes, church walls and towers rising above the lower buildings. Some towers are tall and striking, others are more modest. In a medieval Italian commune, such structures could carry practical purposes, family prestige, or a sense of security. At this early hour, their details remain indistinct. They are simply darker forms against a sky turning slowly from black to grey. Closer to the street, the architecture becomes more intimate. Upper floors lean over the roadway in places. Timber, brick, and stone appear side by side. Beneath the buildings run the porticoes that will accompany us through much of the day. Bologna's covered walkways developed over centuries, with medieval examples reaching back to the 12th century. They were not all identical. Some relied on wooden posts and beams, others used brick or stone. Some felt narrow and domestic, while others opened more generously beside important buildings or public spaces. Together they created a sheltered edge between private homes and public streets. That edge mattered in a busy town. A person could walk beneath the arcades during rain or strong sun. A merchant could arrange goods where passers-by would see them. Neighbours could pause in conversation without standing directly in the roadway. Students could move between lodgings, lessons, churches, shops and assemblies, with at least some shelter overhead. The portico was not a separate world from the city. It was one of the places where the city became most visible to itself. Bologna was more than a picturesque arrangement of brick walls and columns. It was a commune shaped by trade, craft, religion, law, and local government. Roads drew people toward it. Markets gathered the produce and objects of a wider region. Workshops opened onto streets. Churches marked the hours. Households lived above and behind the spaces where business was conducted. And among all these existing rhythms, the presence of students and teachers added another layer of movement. The university's story is often associated with the year 1088. That date is conventionally celebrated, and it gives us a useful point of reference. Yet the beginning was gradual. There was no single morning when the residents of Bologna awoke to find a complete institution standing in the town. The studium grew through the gathering of students and teachers, through the study of texts, through private arrangements and evolving associations, and through a relationship with the commune that developed over time. This is important because it changes the way we picture the day ahead. We are not going to walk toward a medieval campus. There is no central complex waiting to receive every student. The famous Archigymnasio that later brought many schools together belongs to the 16th century, long after the day we're imagining. In the 13th century, learning was dispersed. A teacher might receive students in a private home or another rented space. Larger associations might gather in monastic or religious settings. A student's lodging, a master's room, a stationer's shop, and a church used for an assembly could all form part of the wider geography of university life. The word university itself needs a little gentleness here. In medieval use, a universitas could mean a corporate body, a recognized association of people bound together by shared interests and rules. At Bologna, students played an especially important role in organizing themselves. They formed groups, elected representatives, negotiated, and sought protection in a town where many of them were outsiders. The modern idea of a university as a permanent collection of buildings came later. For this day, it is more helpful to think of a human network spread through the streets. Bologna became especially renowned for the study of law. Civil law, grounded in the renewed study of Roman legal texts, drew attention from students who understood that written rules could shape cities, institutions, property, contracts, privileges, and obligations. Canon law, the law of the Church, formed another major field of study. These subjects were not abstract ornaments. They offered methods for thinking through a complicated world of overlapping authorities and practical needs. A legal text could travel a long distance in time as well as space. Words inherited from the Roman past were read in a medieval room, under circumstances their original writers could not have foreseen. Masters and students tried to understand how those words fit together, how a passage might be interpreted, and how its meaning connected to questions that mattered in their own age. The work was patient. It often proceeded line by line, with commentary building around the older text. Students arrived because respected teachers and useful books could be found here. Their arrival changed the town in turn. A visitor needed somewhere to sleep. He needed bread, perhaps wine, and other ordinary provisions. He might need copying services, writing materials, repairs to clothing, help with messages, or advice from others who spoke in familiar ways. A prosperous student might arrive with a servant and additional belongings. A poorer one might watch each coin carefully. Either way, his presence linked the world of study with the daily economy of Bologna. This mutual dependence did not mean perfect harmony. Residents and students could disagree over rents, debts, behaviour, and privileges. Foreign students needed collective support because they did not automatically possess the protections of local citizens. The commune, however, also had reasons to value them. Students brought money, movement, reputation, and connections. The university's growth and the city's development became entangled. The growth of the studium also belongs to a larger transformation in Bologna. The official history of the university describes the town around the year 1000 as a comparatively small place, then presents the studium as one of the forces that helped it become a medieval metropolis. That change did not happen through learning alone. Communal government, craft, trade, population, roads, walls, religious institutions, and the changing balance of power in northern Italy all formed part of the setting. Yet the presence of scholars gave Bologna an identity that visitors could carry away with them. The road into the city mattered as much as the room at the end of it. A student arriving from another region had already spent days or weeks noticing the landscape change slowly around him. He may have followed a route used by merchants, pilgrims, messengers, officials, and other travellers. The final approach toward Bologna would not have felt like the arrival at an isolated school. It would have felt like entering a commune alive with its own priorities. Gates, walls, churches, market activity, and dense streets announced a town that had to organize the needs of many people at once. Law suited such a place. The revived attention given to the corpus juris civilis, the great body of Roman civil law, did not offer a simple set of answers ready to be applied without thought. It offered a deep textual tradition and a disciplined way to approach questions of order. Masters associated with Bologna became known for the careful study of these legal materials. Irnerius is often remembered among the early influential teachers, though it is more accurate to see him as one important figure in a gradual development than as the solitary founder of a fully formed university. This matters for the atmosphere of our day. The city is not merely decorated with learning. It is trying to understand itself through rules, records, privileges, and negotiated relationships. A student walking beneath a portico may be carrying a text rooted in the Roman past while passing the very ordinary evidence of a medieval commune adapting to growth. The gap between those two worlds is not a problem to be hidden. It is the space in which interpretation becomes useful. There is also a gentler human reason for the city's reputation to spread. Students remember places in detail. They remember the room where a difficult line finally made sense, the master whose explanations were worth copying, the bookseller who could be trusted, the landlord who was fair, the companion who helped them find their way, and the street that offered shelter on a wet morning. When they leave, they carry Bologna outward in stories and habits as much as in formal qualifications. Another traveller hears of the town, another student makes the journey, another upper room acquires a lodger. By the later 13th century, Bologna was known as a learned city, but its learning did not float above ordinary life. It entered the street in small ways. A bookseller's work depended on it. A landlord negotiated with it. A baker served people drawn by it. A church bell marked time for a resident and a scholar alike. A covered walkway sheltered both a merchant and a student carrying notes beneath his cloak. The grey light grows stronger. A few shutters open. A line of smoke rises beyond a roof. From somewhere below comes the soft scrape of a bolt being drawn back. The towers are no longer only silhouettes. Their brick surfaces begin to take colour, and now, rather than looking across the whole city, we narrow our view again. The university may be spread through Bologna, but every day begins somewhere small. It begins in a room, with the weight of a blanket, a folded cloak, a few personal objects, and the quiet decision to rise before the streets become crowded. The room is still cool when the student sits up. There is no need to hurry. The bell has sounded, but the town does not move according to a single precise timetable shared by everyone. Different people wake for different reasons. A baker's day begins earlier than a stationer's. A servant may already be working while a merchant still sleeps. A teacher preparing for a morning reading may be reviewing a passage by lamplight. Our student allows himself a few moments to listen before standing. Below, the building has its own sounds. A door opens at street level. Something wooden is shifted across the floor. A voice speaks briefly, too softly to make out the words. If the room sits above a shop, the household beneath it is beginning the practical work of opening for the day. If it is part of a larger home, the family that rents the space may be tending a hearth or arranging the first tasks of morning. Bologna did not initially offer a uniform system of student housing. A visitor had to find a place within the existing city, and the quality of that place depended on his means, connections, and luck. The room we enter is plausible rather than universal. Another student might live more comfortably, surrounded by servants, clothing, and better furnishings. Someone else might share space or make do with very little. This one has a low bed or pallet, a wool blanket, a chest, a basin, a stool, and a simple writing surface placed where daylight can reach it when the shutters open. A peg or nail holds a cloak. A belt lies coiled nearby. A pair of shoes waits beside the bed, worn but cared for. The chest is important. It gathers the private life of a traveller into a single manageable space. Clothing, folded papers, a few coins, perhaps a seal or a small devotional object, and a letter from home can be kept inside it. The chest may be locked or simply closed with the expectation that the room is respected. In a town filled with temporary residents, personal belongings carry a particular emotional weight. They are the small border around an individual life. The student washes with cool water from the basin. The act is simple and brief. He straightens his clothing, checks the condition of his shoes, and reaches for the cloak that will soften the morning chill beneath the arcades. Clothing varied according to means, origin, season, and circumstance. It is enough to imagine layered garments suited to a cool morning, and a student who wants to look presentable without drawing unnecessary attention. He is not preparing for ceremony. He is preparing to listen. On the writing surface rests the text that will return throughout the day. Perhaps it is not entirely his. Perhaps he has access to a copy through a master, a stationer, or a friend. Perhaps he owns notes rather than a complete manuscript. Books in this world are material objects of consequence. Their value does not need to be repeated every few minutes to be felt. You can see it in the way the student places his hand beneath a gathering of leaves before moving them, in the care with which he keeps liquid away from the page, and in the habit of wrapping or closing the text before leaving. A margin contains notes. Some are written more neatly than others. One line from a previous lesson has been copied with care. Another is abbreviated, made quickly while a master continued speaking. A symbol directs attention back toward a difficult sentence. To modernize, the page might feel dense and unfamiliar, but to the student it is becoming a map. The central text offers the road. The commentary and glosses offer paths that branch outward, circle back, and sometimes clarify a difficult turn. He checks his quill. A penknife, used carefully for trimming, may lie nearby. Ink must be treated with patience. A student who carries writing tools through the town understands the inconvenience of a spill and the value of preparation. Notes are not taken casually. The physical act of writing asks the body to slow down. hand steady, page supported, attention divided between listening and preserving what matters. Beside the text is a folded letter. We do not need to open it. It may have arrived days ago or longer. It may carry family news, a practical question, a remembered voice translated into written lines. The road home is not impossible, but neither is it easy. A journey takes planning, money, weather, and time. The letter rests in the room as a quiet reminder that learning often involves distance. It is possible to feel fortunate and lonely at once, grateful for the chance to study, aware of the town's energy, and still conscious of another place where familiar people continue their own daily routines. Many students in Bologna came from beyond the city and beyond the region. Some travelled from outside Italy. Their lives varied widely. The image of a medieval student as a carefree adolescent captures only a portion of a much larger world. At Bologna, the early prominence of law attracted men who might already have experience in church administration, civic offices, or other forms of responsibility. A student could be mature enough to understand exactly why a legal education mattered, and still feel uncertain when he heard unfamiliar footsteps outside his door. The room begins to brighten as the shutters open. Grey light falls across the writing surface. The student folds a sheet, secures what he will carry, and places the rest inside the chest. A few coins go into a pouch. The cloak settles across his shoulders. He pauses once more, not because anything dramatic is about to happen, but because this small pause belongs to the rhythm of leaving. The day is not organised by a personal clock carried in a pocket. Time arrives through light, custom, bells, and the expected order of activities. The student knows when the morning reading should begin because the town has taught him to recognise its signals. He notices how much grey has entered the window, how far the household below has progressed in opening, and whether the street has reached the particular level of movement that belongs to an early hour. This way of keeping time is flexible without being vague. A lecture scheduled within the university's rules still matters. A bell still prompts people to adjust their pace. Yet the day is experienced through shared sound, rather than through a private display of minutes. The student joins the rhythm already moving beyond the shutters. He checks the room once more before leaving. Ink is safe. The chest is closed. The letter rests where it will not be disturbed. The text he carries is protected as well as circumstances allow. Such small habits reduce worry. A traveller learns that peace of mind often comes from repeating a few practical motions until they require almost no thought. The stairway is narrow. Its steps have been used by household members, customers, lodgers, and visitors. The air changes as he descends. The room's faint smell of cold wax and paper gives way to warmer traces of smoke and food. At the bottom, morning waits beyond the door. When it opens, the portico receives him. The covered street is no longer empty. Another figure walks past with a bundle. Somewhere nearby, a shutter swings outward. The first warmth from a bakery meets the cool, damp air, and Bologna begins its day not with a single grand event, but with dozens of small tasks unfolding side by side. The morning walk is one of the quiet pleasures of the town. Bologna is waking now, but it has not yet become crowded. Beneath the portico, sounds gather without competing too sharply. A broom moves across worn paving. A wooden shutter opens and is secured. Someone sets a basket near the edge of a shop front. A cart rolls slowly along the street beyond the columns, its wheels finding the uneven places in the road. The bell that sounded earlier has faded, leaving space for the ordinary noises that follow it. The air carries the smell of bread. Bread belongs to the practical centre of medieval life. Its exact form varies with grain, wealth, household, and local custom, but its importance is difficult to miss. In the early morning, the warmth of ovens becomes part of the street. A baker's work has begun long before a student steps outside. Fuel has been gathered, dough has been prepared, heat has been judged with experience. The result moves outward in baskets and cloths, into homes and eating places, into the hands of people who will need something sustaining before the day grows long. Our student may pause for a modest piece of bread or carry it with him. Perhaps there is a little cheese. Perhaps there is nothing more elaborate than the simple satisfaction of warmth in cool air. We do not need to invent a fixed breakfast for everyone in Bologna. Meals depended on circumstance. The important thing is to notice how study rests on ordinary labour. A lecture can begin only after many other people have already been awake for hours. The porticoes offer shelter from a light mist. A few drops reach the open roadway, darkening dust and stone. Under the roofline, the walkway remains protected enough that goods can be arranged and people can move without discomfort. The supports are not perfectly uniform. Some are wooden, their surfaces marked by time. Some are built of brick. Elsewhere, stone appears. The variety keeps the street from feeling like a formal corridor. It is domestic, commercial, and communal all at once. Small workshops begin to open. A craftsperson places tools where the growing light can reach them. A porter shifts a load from one shoulder to the other. A servant carries a vessel. A water carrier follows a route known through repetition. A cook tends a hearth. A merchant checks what has arrived and what still needs to be brought forward. Cloth, leather, wood, metal, food, writing materials, and countless other needs bind the town together. The student passes a church door. The building is part of the visual and auditory structure of the day, whether or not he enters at this moment. Bells divide time in a way that everyone recognizes, though not everyone experiences each hour in the same fashion. Their sound travels differently depending on distance, walls, weather, and the direction of the street. One bell may arrive clearly. Another is softened by roofs and arcades until it becomes only a muted suggestion. At a corner, the covered walkway opens briefly toward a wider space. The town reveals more of itself. Stalls are being prepared. A few animals are guided through. People greet one another with the ease of neighbours or the caution of strangers. A student hears accents that remind him how far Bologna's reputation has travelled. An Italian from another commune walks beside someone from farther north. A foreign student turns a phrase in a language the passer-by does not understand. A servant carries belongings for a man whose clothing suggests greater means. Another scholar walks alone, protecting a packet of papers beneath his cloak. The diversity is not decorative. It is one reason students formed associations. Living in a strange town could be difficult even when the town welcomed the money and reputation that scholars brought with them. Familiar speech, shared origin, and mutual support mattered. Later in the day, we'll see how those associations developed into a distinctive part of Bologna's university life. For now, their presence is visible in the way small groups form naturally along the street. The streets also reveal the wider geography that feeds the city. Bologna sits within a landscape of roads. Goods and people arrive from farms, villages, towns, and more distant regions. A basket of produce has travelled a shorter route than a foreign scholar. Cloth, writing materials, metalwork, grain, wine, and messages move according to their own networks. The city gathers them, uses them, and sends other things outward in return. A university town intensifies this movement. A new student enters through the gates carrying questions that are both practical and intellectual. Where can he stay? Which master should he hear? Which companions share his place of origin? Where can he obtain the text he needs? What will the journey home cost when the season changes? For the first few days, every street demands attention. After several weeks, the same streets begin to answer questions before they are asked. Morning makes that process visible. A resident walks with the confidence of habit. A traveller looks upward more often. A scholar who has lived in Bologna for years pauses to direct someone newly arrived. A servant leads the way through a lane while his employer follows. Near a wider street, movement thickens briefly as carts, pedestrians and animals negotiate the available space without the neat separation of a modern road. The covered walkway moderates that complexity. Beneath it, the student can slow down. He can step aside without standing in the mud. He can notice the doorways, the shop fronts, and the repeated supports that turn a confusing city into a sequence of recognizable landmarks. The portico is architecture, but it is also memory made physical. The city's relationship with students is measured in practical transactions. A landlord collects rent. A seller provides food. A stationer arranges access to texts. A copyist turns hours of labour into pages. A tailor or cobbler repairs what travel and weather have worn down. Messengers carry letters. Teachers receive payment. Inns and households adjust to the arrival of visitors. The university may be an intellectual community, but it is also an economic fact. This does not make the town less romantic. It makes it more human. There is a quiet beauty in seeing the structures that allow thought to happen. A student crossing Bologna toward a morning reading carries not only his text and writing tools, but the unseen contribution of many people. The bread warming his hand, the cloak repaired at a shop, the shelter of the arcade, the rented room behind him, the copied notes under his arm, and the bench waiting in another building all belong to the same day. A narrow side street leads past upper stories that reach toward one another. Laundry or cloth may hang in a sheltered place. Smoke rises and disperses. Somewhere a dog barks once and then loses interest. The roadway's busier now. The student keeps beneath the portico where he can, moving at an unhurried pace. There is enough time. He passes small devotional images set into walls or near entrances, part of a city in which religious life is present in architecture, sound, calendar and routine. He passes a workshop where the first steady tapping of the day begins. He passes a seller who is arranging goods with the practiced movement of someone who has repeated the task through many mornings. The sky is lighter, though the sun has not fully warmed the brick. The university does not separate the student from any of this. It asks him to move through it. The lesson room is one destination among many urban destinations. He does not leave the city in order to study. He enters deeper into it. Near the place where the morning reading will be held, several students gather. Their conversation is subdued. One checks a page, another adjusts his cloak. Someone steps aside to allow a resident to pass. The room ahead is not monumental. Its importance comes from what happens inside it. A text opened, a voice raised just enough to carry, and a group of listeners settling into attention. The marketplace noises recede as the student crosses the threshold. Outside, shutters continue to open. Bread continues to cool. Porters continue along their routes. Rain touches the street beyond the arcade. But inside the room, the day narrows to a passage of law, a master's measured explanation, and the soft scratch of quills beginning to move across the page. The room is plain enough that nothing distracts from the text. There may be benches for some of the students, with others standing or finding space where they can. A writing surface is useful when available, but the arrangement does not resemble a carefully designed modern classroom. This is an urban room adapted to teaching. Its walls hold the coolness of morning. The light arrives unevenly through windows and doorway. A lamp or candle may still be useful in the dimness, though daylight is gradually strengthening beyond the shutters. At the front sits or stands the master. The word lecture has become so ordinary that it is easy to forget its older meaning. In a medieval university, the lecturer is closely tied to the act of reading. A selected text is opened and read aloud. The master proceeds through it carefully, offering explanation and commentary. At Bologna, where civil and canon law stand near the centre of the studium's identity, the text may be one of the legal authorities that students have come a long way to study. The pace is deliberate. A sentence is read in Latin. The master pauses. He identifies a term whose meaning needs attention. He explains a relationship between one part of the passage and another. A student follows as best he can, watching the line on the page, listening for the point at which the older text becomes clearer. The room settles into a pattern: reading, pause, explanation, note. Reading, pause, explanation, note. A modern listener might imagine that the value of the lesson lies in receiving information as quickly as possible. The medieval rhythm is different. The inherited text carries authority, but it does not interpret itself. Meaning must be approached patiently. A word can matter because of where it appears, because of its relationship to another word, because a later commentator has clarified it, or because a difficult question has accumulated around it over generations. The page is not a flat surface, it is a layered place. Around the central text, glosses gather. A gloss may be brief, perhaps little more than a definition. It may direct the reader toward a related point. It may preserve the work of earlier teachers who tried to bring order to a complex body of law. The margins become crowded with thought. When a student looks down, he does not see only the line being read aloud. He sees the history of people reading the same line before him. This is one of the quiet mysteries of the medieval university town. A legal passage written in a distant age has arrived in a rented room in Bologna. It has crossed centuries not by magic, but through copying, teaching, correction, and the stubborn usefulness of words. The student hears it in the morning while rain moves gently beyond the portico. The town outside belongs to the 13th century. The page before him reaches backward much farther. The master does not need to raise his voice dramatically. Attention comes from structure. Students have paid to learn. Their associations have helped turn private arrangements into more regulated courses. By the 13th century, lectures could be organised into set hours and attendance could be required. The process is still far from the experience of a modern timetable displayed on a screen, but it has acquired rules. Hours matter. Progress through the material matters. The student who has travelled to Bologna expects something more than a casual conversation. The lesson might focus on civil law, the study of Roman legal texts that has become central to Bologna's reputation. It might turn toward canon law, the law of the church, another major area of intellectual and practical importance. We do not need to follow a precise legal case. It is enough to notice the habits of mind being trained. A question may concern how an agreement is understood. Another may involve property, obligation, authority, procedure, or the meaning of a privilege. A student learns to notice distinctions. What appears simple at first may depend on definitions. A general rule may require careful interpretation when brought beside another rule. A term used in one context may not carry exactly the same force in another. The work asks for patience rather than speed. Latin gives the lesson a shared working language. Students who speak differently in the street can meet inside a text written in a learned language familiar from education, administration, and the church. Their command of it is not necessarily identical. One student follows easily. Another must work harder to keep pace. The master's pronunciation may carry local qualities, and students may bring accents of their own. Even so, Latin allows a room of travellers to gather around the same sentence. The experience of hearing a text read aloud also matters in a culture where access to books cannot be taken for granted. The human voice steadies the pace. A student can follow the place in a manuscript when he has one, glance toward borrowed notes when he does not, and store a portion of the explanation in memory. Repetition is not a failure of imagination. It is one of the tools by which complex material becomes familiar enough to use. Memory has a physical dimension. A passage heard in the same room, beneath the same beams, at the same hour of morning can attach itself to place. A later walk beneath the portico may call it back. So may the sight of a note compressed into the margin. The student is building an internal arrangement of the material, not only collecting written fragments. The master, too, is performing skilled labour. He must decide how far to move during the appointed time, where to pause, what to explain, and what to reserve for a more extended return. A passage can be famous because it is useful, difficult because it has invited disagreement, or important because later interpretation has gathered densely around it. The master does not need to display every possible complication at once. Good teaching depends on sequence. The students notice that sequence even when they cannot describe it. A difficult idea is introduced, allowed to settle, and connected to something heard before. The room advances slowly enough to preserve coherence. The work feels less like racing through a volume than like moving along a path where each turn has been marked by earlier travellers. The method also teaches restraint. A student may feel the temptation to answer before the question has been stated fully. The room discourages that habit. First, identify the terms. Then notice whether the disagreement is real or only apparent. Then ask what authority bears upon the issue and whether the comparison is fair. A quick answer can be satisfying, but a careful answer is more likely to endure. This discipline has an emotional quality as well as an intellectual one. To distinguish patiently is to accept that confusion is not a personal failure. A difficult text can remain difficult for a while. A question can be approached from more than one direction. Another student's response can reveal a point that was missed without turning the room into a contest of pride. The master models that patience when he allows a pause to stand. Silence does not always mean that the lesson has faltered. Sometimes the room needs a few breaths before the next step. A listener follows the previous sentence inward, compares it with the note on the page, and feels the argument become more stable. In this way, the afternoon does more than communicate doctrine. It teaches a pace of mind. Long after the details of a particular question have faded, the student may remember how to slow an argument down until its parts can be seen. These skills mattered outside the teaching room. Medieval Europe was filled with written claims and layered jurisdictions. Communes, churches, rulers, institutions, families, merchants, and property holders all had reasons to value people who could work carefully with legal language. Bologna's law students were not studying an ornamental puzzle detached from life. Many understood that training in interpretation could shape a future career or deepen responsibilities they already held. The master returns to the text. His explanation is not the only sound. Quills move in brief runs across parchment or paper. A student stops to trim a pen. A bench shifts. Someone coughs softly and then becomes still again. From the street comes the subdued rhythm of passing feet. The portico filters the town. Rather than silencing it completely, the covered walkway turns outdoor noise into a distant accompaniment. Writing notes during a lesson requires judgment. The student cannot preserve every word. Even when a master's commentary is familiar enough to proceed in an orderly way, the listener must decide what to capture. A short phrase may be enough to reopen the memory later. An abbreviation saves space and time. A mark in the margin promises a return during the evening. The act of note-taking becomes another kind of interpretation. There is no printing press to make abundant identical copies available at low cost. That change lies in the future. In this room, access to a reliable text has material limits. One student may own a manuscript. Another may work from copied extracts or notes. A master's reading helps hold the group together by giving the text an audible presence. A student who cannot glance easily at every line can still follow the movement of explanation. It would be easy to romanticize the room too completely. Study can be tiring. The language is demanding. The air may grow stale. A student's concentration may wander briefly toward the brighter street outside, or toward the thought of food later in the day. A difficult sentence may remain difficult even after a careful explanation. Yet there is comfort in the routine. The master proceeds. The students return their attention. The page yields its meaning slowly rather than all at once. A bell sounds somewhere at a distance. The master does not close the book immediately. He continues until the proper place is reached. The lesson has its own internal rhythm shaped by the text. When he finally pauses, the room loosens. A student rolls his shoulders. Another checks the note he made too quickly and adds a missing word before the memory fades. Quiet conversation begins at the edges. The passage remains open for a moment longer. Our student looks at one marginal note, written close beside the line that occupied the morning. The note is not elegant. It may need to be copied more carefully later. But it holds something useful, the point at which an inherited sentence became slightly more intelligible. This is how a learned city is built, not only through grand names and official privileges, but through countless small acts of attention. A master reads. A listener writes. A difficult distinction becomes clearer. A question is carried out into the street and kept for the afternoon. The students begin to leave the room. Outside, Bologna has brightened fully. The mist is lifting. The sheltered walkway is busier than before. The university seems to dissolve back into the city as soon as the door opens. Yet the lesson continues in another form, carried beneath cloaks and tucked into notes as the students scatter along the porticoes. The crowd separates naturally after the morning reading. Some students remain together, continuing a point from the lesson in low voices. Others turn toward lodgings, errands, meetings, or another appointment. One disappears into a side street. Another pauses beneath the arcade to speak with a bookseller's assistant. A third moves toward a church or convent where an assembly may be held later. There is no central quadrangle into which everyone pours. The town receives the students and redistributes them. This scattered quality is one of the defining features of Bologna's medieval studium. The university has grown within the city rather than apart from it. Teachers, especially in earlier periods, could welcome students into their homes and form relationships that felt almost familial. Lessons and courses developed from private arrangements before the growing community acquired more formal rules. Larger meetings found suitable space where it was available, including religious buildings and convents. The shape of the university was therefore also the shape of Bologna itself. Walking through the streets, you would not encounter a single wall and say that everything inside belongs to learning, while everything outside belongs to ordinary life. The boundaries are porous. A teacher's household may also be a place of instruction. A portico may shelter a conversation about a legal point, and moments later, a merchant arranging goods. A church may gather worshippers at one hour and host the assembly of a student association at another. A rented room can be a place of sleep, study, and letter writing. The town does not merely contain the university, it helps perform it. This arrangement may feel unfamiliar to anyone accustomed to the visual symbols of modern higher education. Gates, libraries, lecture theatres, athletic fields, residence halls, and paths crossing a defined campus. In Bologna during the later 13th century, the student's map is different. He remembers the house where a master reads. He knows the route to a stationer. He understands which covered street leads most comfortably through rain. He knows where companions from a similar region tend to gather. He learns the city as a series of practical relationships. The porticos make this geography easier to imagine. Their repeated columns and sheltered paths connect spaces without erasing the individuality of each building. Some stretches feel open and active. Others grow dim where the street narrows. The same route changes with the hour. At dawn it carried solitary footsteps. Now it holds sellers, servants, messengers, residents, and scholars weaving gently around one another. A teacher passes in the opposite direction. Students acknowledge him with respect, but the encounter is not theatrical. His importance rests in reputation and knowledge, in the ability to guide readers through difficult texts, and in the trust that draws people to hear him. Medieval teaching could remain personal even as the university became more organized. A respected master's room might become a destination known to visitors soon after they arrived in town. Students at Bologna organized themselves with unusual force. Many were foreigners in the broad medieval sense, not citizens of Bologna, and often strangers to local protections. Some came from other parts of the Italian peninsula. Others crossed the Alps. To live in an unfamiliar commune without a local family network could be inconvenient and occasionally risky. A person needed advice about lodging, disputes, debts, fees, and custom. He needed people willing to speak for shared concerns. The nationes, or nations, answered some of this need. The word should not be understood exactly in the modern political sense. These were associations organized around origin, offering mutual support and familiarity in a strange place. To a student far from home, the sound of his own language or the habits of people from a known region could make the city feel less impersonal. A nation was practical, but it was also emotional. It reduced the distance between an outsider and the town around him. By the early 13th century, such associations had developed into larger student universities with statutes and influence. Bologna's student-oriented organization became one of its most distinctive features. Rectors could be elected from among the students, supported by representatives of the nations in a wider assembly. The university was not only a body that acted upon students. Students themselves helped govern it. We will return to those structures later, when the afternoon light has softened and meetings feel more natural. For now it is enough to sense their presence beneath the ordinary movement of the street. The student who leaves a lesson is not simply an isolated individual. Even if he walks alone, associations stand behind him. Companions from a familiar region may help him navigate the city. Rules and negotiations shape the price of his room, the expectations of his course, and the protection he receives as a scholar. At one intersection, a group turns toward a larger religious building. Bologna's official university history records assemblies of Italian students from beyond Bologna, the Tramontani, at San Domenico, while foreigners from beyond the mountains, the Ultramontani, gathered at San Procolo. The names carry a map inside them. They tell us how movement across landscape becomes organization inside a town. There is no need to follow the gathering today. Our route continues at an easier pace, past workshops and doorways, beneath beams darkened by years of smoke and weather. A shopkeeper recognizes a returning customer. A resident moves around a cluster of students with the patience of someone accustomed to sharing the street. A boy carries a bundle too large for his arms and adjusts it without stopping. The learned city remains a working city. The scattered university changes how we think about belonging. A student may not feel that he has entered an institution each morning and departed each afternoon. Instead, the institution surrounds him in fragments. It appears in the master's voice, the stationer's shelves, the rented room, the assembly space, the legal privilege, the companion from home, and the bell that reminds him time has passed. One of those fragments waits ahead beneath another portico. The air there carries a different scent: parchment, paper, wood, leather, and ink. A shop front opens toward the sheltered walkway. Inside, pages are stacked, handled, checked, copied, and discussed. The morning lesson depended on a text. Now we turn toward the people whose work made that text available. The stationer's shop is not silent, though it invites a quieter kind of attention. The street remains active outside. Feet pass beneath the arcade. A seller calls briefly to someone farther along the walkway. A cart moves through the open road. But inside the shop the eye is drawn towards smaller things. A stack of sheets, a gathering of leaves, a binding, a ruled page, a line of ink drying near a window. Books in medieval Bologna belong to an economy of skill. The process begins before a copyist writes the first word. A surface must be chosen and prepared. Parchment, made from animal skin, can preserve text with remarkable durability when handled well, but it asks for labour and resources. Paper is also becoming an increasingly important part of the European book world, especially in regions connected to Mediterranean production and trade. By the later 13th century, a student in an Italian city might encounter both materials. Their use depends on purpose, cost, availability, and the kind of book being produced. Sheets do not become a codex merely because they have received ink. They are folded into gatherings, often called quires. The arrangement must be kept in order. A copyist needs lines to guide the writing, whether ruled visibly or impressed more lightly. Margins are planned rather than accidental, especially in a legal manuscript where commentary may surround the central text. Space becomes part of the argument. The main authority occupies one region of the page. Glosses gather around it, physically enacting the relationship between inheritance and interpretation. Before ink reaches the page, the pen requires attention. A quill is selected and cut. Its point changes with use and must be maintained. Ink has its own character. It should flow well enough to write steadily without spreading so freely that letters lose their edges. The copyist's hand is trained not only in the shape of letters, but in the management of materials. After copying, a text may still require correction. A reliable manuscript depends upon comparison and checking. A missing line, repeated phrase, mistaken abbreviation, or misplaced word can alter meaning. In a legal text, accuracy carries obvious importance. Correction may appear in small marks, additions, erasures, or words inserted where space allows. The page does not conceal its history completely. It records the effort to become trustworthy. Other crafts may enter before the book reaches its final form. Decoration varies widely, from functional initials to more elaborate visual work. Binding protects gatherings and turns separate pieces into an object intended to endure. Leather, boards, thread, clasps, and skilled hands may all contribute. Not every student book is richly finished. Many working texts are valued precisely because they are useful. A book can be visually modest and intellectually crowded. Seen this way, the stationer's shop is not a place where a single product waits passively to be purchased. It is a meeting point in a chain of work. Herding, trade, preparation, papermaking, copying, correction, decoration, binding, lending, rental, sale, and study can converge in the life of one manuscript. The scholar who turns a page is touching the end of many processes he may never witness directly. Before a text can be studied, materials must be prepared. Parchment begins with animal skin and requires labour before it becomes a surface suitable for writing. Paper, increasingly present in parts of medieval Europe, offers another possibility, though use varies by place, purpose, and period. Sheets must be folded and arranged. Lines may be ruled to guide the copyist. Ink must be prepared. Pens must be trimmed. A text must be copied, corrected, and sometimes decorated. Binding gathers separate leaves into a durable object. Each stage calls for knowledge of its own. A student who pauses at the shop sees only a portion of that process, but the portion is enough to suggest the wider network. One worker checks a page, another discusses a copy. A packet waits to be collected. A book that has been used often shows its history and worn edges, softened surfaces, and notes added by readers. A newer text feels stiffer and more formal. The shop gathers objects at different points in their lives. The most important fact is not simply that manuscripts are costly, it is that scarcity shapes the culture of learning. When books cannot be multiplied instantly, people develop ways to share access, preserve accuracy, and distribute labour. A student may not need to own a luxurious complete volume in order to study. He may consult a master's text, borrow material, acquire copied portions, or rely on notes. The stationer becomes more than a seller of finished objects. He can stand at the centre of a system that connects texts, copyists, scholars, and readers. In medieval university towns, one important method of copying became known as the picia system. The Latin word picia means a piece. A corrected exemplar could be divided into sections or gatherings and rented out separately for copying. Because different copyists could work on different portions, a text could be reproduced more efficiently than if a single person copied the entire book from beginning to end. The system also created opportunities for oversight and correction. It was not the only way books were made, and its precise use varied by town and time, but it fits naturally into the world of a university dependent on texts. Imagine the calm, practical logic of it. A student or copyist needs a portion of a legal work. A stationer keeps access to an approved or trusted exemplar. One gathering is released for copying while another is already in different hands. Somewhere in Bologna, several people may be working at once on sections that will eventually belong to the same text. Their rooms are separate. Their pens move independently, yet the work is connected. Copying is slow enough to demand concentration, and ordinary enough to become a livelihood. A copyist settles near good light. The page is positioned carefully. The eye moves from exemplar to new sheet and back again. The hand follows. A line completed carelessly may need correction. An abbreviation saves space but must remain intelligible. Fatigue matters. Light matters. The quality of ink matters. A blot is not an abstract error. It is a physical event on a valuable surface. The finished manuscript preserves traces of these decisions. It may contain corrections, marginal instructions, changes of hand, or signs that portions were copied under different circumstances. To a later scholar, such details can be evidence. To the 13th century student, they are simply part of the material reality of reading. Our student brings the memory of the morning lesson into the shop. Perhaps he's looking for access to a passage that needs to be checked more carefully. Perhaps he needs additional paper or a new quill. Perhaps he has come only to ask when a copied gathering will be ready. The stationer answers in the practical language of time, availability, and cost. The exchange is not grand, but it matters. A missing page can interrupt study. A reliable copy can steady it. Nearby, a scribe works where daylight falls most clearly. The movement is economical. Dip the pen. Remove excess ink. Return to the line. Pause. Compare. Continue. There is something deeply restful in watching skilled work performed without haste. The shop is full of small sounds, the soft contact of page and hand, a murmured question, the faint scrape of a penknife, the turning of leaves, the street moving just beyond the threshold. Leather and wood add their scents to the sharper smell of ink. Dust catches in a narrow beam of light. A page may be plain or visually rich depending on its purpose and expense. Some books include decorative initials or other embellishments. Legal manuscripts can become visually dense, with the main text surrounded by commentary. The arrangement is not random. The centre and the margins speak to one another. The page becomes a record of the way knowledge accumulates around an authority. A legal manuscript can ask the eye to travel in several directions. The main text may occupy a compact central block. Commentary frames it. Symbols, abbreviations, and references help the reader move between layers. The design is dense, but density does not mean disorder. With practice, the page becomes navigable. A new student may find the visual field overwhelming. He searches for the place where the master has begun, then loses it when his attention moves too quickly toward a note. An experienced reader handles the page differently. He knows when to remain with the centre and when to glance outward. He recognizes common abbreviations. He can return to the relevant line after listening to a longer explanation. Reading is partly an education of the eye. The manuscript also records use. A working book may show the pressure of fingers at a corner, the faint discoloration of frequent handling, a corrected word or an added mark that made sense to a particular reader. It does not need to be pristine in order to be valued. Its usefulness is visible in the traces left by attention. For the student, such marks can become companions. A sign made weeks earlier calls back a lesson. A reference points toward another passage. A blank space invites a future clarification. The page changes slowly as study changes the reader. The book is inherited, but the encounter with it remains personal. The student's own notes are humbler. They carry the speed of listening. Yet they belong to the same world. A brief marginal mark made during the lectura may later be expanded into a cleaner explanation. A copied phrase can become the anchor for an afternoon question. A borrowed section may help correct a misunderstanding. Study proceeds through return. Outside, the portico continues to shelter trade. A person stops near the shop front, then moves on. Rain has nearly ended, leaving the street darker where water touched it. The air smells clean. The sun, filtered by cloud and overhang, creates a gentle brightness without glare. Books bring distant voices into the present, but the shop reminds us that ideas need physical support. They need surfaces, tools, rooms, light and time. They need people who know how to produce an object that another person can trust. They need money to circulate, agreements to be made, and errors to be caught. Intellectual life is never only intellectual. The stationer's shop is one of the places where Bologna's learned reputation becomes visible as labour. Its importance lies not in luxury alone, but in repetition. Page after page, line after line, copy after copy, each one helping a text move through the city. The student gathers what he needs and steps back beneath the portico. By now the morning is mature, the streets are fuller, light has entered the narrower lanes. The smell of ovens has softened into the broader mixture of midday. Cooked food, smoke, damp stone, animals, leather, and the warmth of people moving through a busy town. The morning has been devoted to a text. The hour ahead belongs to more ordinary needs. A meal waits somewhere, along with the rented room, the household that surrounds it, and a brief pause before the arguments of the afternoon begin. Midday changes the pace of Bologna. The town does not become silent, but its energy shifts. The morning's first urgency has passed. Sellers have arranged their goods. Lessons have ended or paused. Workers measure what remains to be done. The sun stands higher, though clouds and porticoes continue to soften its reach. Beneath the covered walkways, people linger a little longer in conversation. Our student turns back toward his lodging or toward a simple place where food can be obtained. The route is familiar now. Columns pass in a steady rhythm. A shop he saw opening at sunrise is fully active. The bakery has lost the intensity of its earliest work, but bread continues to move outward into the neighbourhood. A pot sends up steam near a hearth. Someone carries onions or greens in a basket. Another person pours a measure of wine. Meals varied too widely for us to place one tidy dish before every student in medieval Bologna. Wealth mattered, region mattered, season mattered, religious calendars mattered. A prosperous visitor could eat differently from someone counting coins carefully. Still, a modest meal can be imagined without forcing too much certainty onto the past. Bread, legumes, or a simple cooked dish, perhaps cheese, fruit, greens, or wine in an ordinary quantity. Meat and fish appeared according to circumstance, resources, and custom, but the quiet daily foundation often rested on humbler foods. The student sits where space allows. He may share a table with companions or eat more privately. The meal does not need to become an event. Its purpose is restorative. After a morning of close listening, the physical simplicity of bread and a warm dish is enough to draw attention back into the body. The season would influence what appears at the table. Greens, onions, beans, fruit, cheese, oil, wine, and bread enter meals in combinations shaped by availability and means. Religious practice also affects the rhythm of eating across the year, with periods of fasting or abstinence changing what households prepare. The student does not need to analyze any of this while he eats. He simply receives a meal appropriate to the place, the day, and the resources of the household. A bowl is set down. Bread is torn rather than admired. Conversation pauses for a few bites. After hours spent with legal language, ordinary food offers its own kind of clarity. It asks no interpretation beyond hunger and enough time to eat slowly. Conversation moves easily around practical matters. Someone mentions a passage from the lesson. Another has heard news from home. A student asks about a room becoming available near a more convenient street. Someone else complains gently about a price, not with outrage, but with the familiar weariness of a person whose money must last. A servant comes and goes. A resident pauses to exchange a few words with the household. The university's presence can be measured in these small exchanges. The household itself may adapt to academic life in subtle ways. A room that once belonged to a family member can become lodging for a visitor. A meal may need to stretch far enough to include one more person. A servant may learn which student rises early and which one returns after dusk. A landlord may discover that a scholar values quiet, proximity to a teacher, or shelter beneath a reliable portico more than decorative comfort. The rhythms of private life shift around the presence of temporary residents. For a foreign student, lodging is more than a roof. It is the nearest thing to a stable base in a city where much of the day is spent moving. The rented room holds the objects that cannot be carried everywhere: spare clothing, letters, money, notes, perhaps a book chest or writing materials, and the personal reminders of a life beyond Bologna. Its stairs and doorway become part of memory. Even an imperfect room can acquire the emotional weight of home when it is the place to which one returns after every lesson. Economic difference remains visible. A well-funded student may rent more space, employ help, obtain books more easily, and dine with greater variety. Another may share resources, borrow texts, limit expenses, and rely more heavily on companions. The university gathers people into the same intellectual world without erasing their unequal circumstances. A morning lecture can place them near one another on benches while their evenings unfold in very different rooms. The city must absorb these variations without ever becoming a modern service designed around student convenience. Bologna is still a medieval commune with its own residents, obligations, conflicts, and seasons. A scholar learns to fit himself into that world. He waits when he must wait. He negotiates when a price seems high. He asks companions for advice. Gradually, what felt inconvenient becomes routine. Students need lodging. Because Bologna does not provide a single system of residence halls for everyone, households and landlords become part of the academic world. A spare upper room can produce income. A convenient location beneath a good portico may be valued more highly during wet weather. A student with greater means can secure more space or bring assistance. Another accepts inconvenience in exchange for a lower price. The town adjusts, negotiates, and sometimes argues. Food sellers feel the university as well. So do copyists, stationers, notaries, tailors, cobblers, messengers, servants, and porters. The presence of foreign students is not an abstract honour. It changes demand. It brings money into particular streets and households. The commune has reasons to protect the conditions that allow scholars to remain, even while residents may occasionally resent the pressure that visitors place on rents or daily life. From the window of the lodging, the student can see a portion of the street. Midday light reaches beneath the portico at an angle. A child passes quickly, then slows when called. Two men stop to speak near a column. A customer enters the shop below. The city's learned identity feels less obvious here, but it has not disappeared. It is embedded in the rent paid for the room and in the folded pages resting on the writing surface. The room looks different in daylight than it did before sunrise. What felt mysterious in candlelight is now simply modest. The blanket is folded. The basin catches a pale reflection. The chest remains closed. A small irregularity in the wall becomes visible. Dust rests where the morning light finds it. The student places his notes down and allows himself a brief interval without reading. Rest is part of study, though it rarely receives the same attention. A mind that has followed legal distinctions all morning benefits from ordinary sounds. The household below, a vessel set on a surface, footsteps on the stairs, the street continuing without him. Perhaps he opens the shutters a little wider. Perhaps he sits on the edge of the bed. Perhaps he looks at the folded letter from home but leaves it untouched for now. This is where the day's slight loneliness becomes visible without becoming heavy. Bologna is full of people. The student is not abandoned. He has associations, companions, teachers, and a host household around him. Yet the room belongs to a life temporarily detached from its original place. Familiar voices are represented by ink on a folded sheet. The road home exists somewhere beyond the city walls. For a few quiet minutes, the distance can be felt. Then a bell enters the room from outside. Its sound is softer here than it was beneath the open sky. Walls and shutters absorb part of it. The note seems to arrive through the wood rather than through the air. It does not demand action immediately, but it reminds the student that the afternoon has its own shape. He checks the notes from the lectura. One line has been written too quickly and must be clarified while memory remains. Another points toward a question likely to return during a repetition or discussion. The book trade, the lesson room, the lodging, and the meal begin to connect. Each part of the day prepares the next. Before leaving, he gathers only what he needs. The rest returns to the chest or remains safely placed on the writing surface. The cloak may be less necessary now, but the streets beneath the arcades remain cool in patches, especially where dampness lingers. The student descends once again. Midday traffic receives him. The town has become busier, but the pace can still be gentle. A group of students turns ahead. A shopkeeper withdraws briefly into the shade. Somewhere a hammer falls in a steady rhythm. The student follows the covered walkway toward an afternoon gathering where listening will no longer be enough. The morning asked him to receive a text. The afternoon will ask him to test his understanding of it. The afternoon room feels different from the morning room, even if some of the same faces have returned. The light is warmer now. It enters at a lower angle and reaches farther across the floor. A window is open enough to let in the muted life of the street. The passing of feet, a cart turning somewhere beyond the columns, the occasional call of a cellar, and the softened bell of a church that seems farther away than it did at dawn. The students settle with a little less stiffness. They have eaten. They have spoken with companions. They carry the morning passage in their notes, and more importantly in their thoughts. The lecturer asked them to follow a master's reading and commentary. The afternoon can ask something more active. At Bologna, selected material from lectures could be examined further in repetitiones. The word suggests a return, but not a mindless repetition. A difficult point is taken up again so that it can be considered with more room to breathe. A passage that moved quickly during the morning receives a slower treatment. Distinctions can be made more clearly. Questions can be raised, answered, and refined. Students are no longer only recording the movement of a lesson, they are learning how to inhabit an argument. Our student opens his notes to the mark he made earlier. The marginal line has waited through the visit to the stationer, the midday meal, and the brief stillness of the rented room. Now it becomes useful. The master returns to the relevant passage, but he does not merely restate what he said before. He turns it slightly, allowing the students to see a different edge. We do not need to invent the exact legal question discussed on this particular afternoon. It is enough to understand the kind of attention being practiced. A general rule may seem clear until two circumstances place pressure upon it. A word such as obligation, possession, agreement, authority, or exception can open into smaller questions. Does the meaning change if an action is voluntary rather than compelled? Does a claim depend on intention, custom, status, or procedure? How should two authoritative statements be reconciled when they appear to pull in different directions? The answers are not treated as casual opinions. Students learn to reason inside an inherited intellectual structure. They identify a difficulty, consider distinctions, test consequences, and listen for the form of a stronger reply. The exercise can feel almost architectural. Each point supports another point. A careless step leaves the structure unstable. A careful distinction allows the whole arrangement to settle. For a listener resting centuries later, there is something soothing in the discipline of it. The room is not driven by speed. The question is allowed to unfold. A student does not need to solve the whole world before sunset. He needs only to follow one thread with patience. A repetitio could offer the master space to elaborate on a topic arising from recent teaching. Public disputations, the questions publicae disputatae described in Bologna's official university history, brought another dimension. Students could demonstrate skill through argument, with a meaningful freedom to reason and respond. These forms of study remind us that medieval learning was not simply memorization performed in silence. It could be oral, social, and intellectually demanding. The room changes subtly when participation begins. A student offers a point. His voice is measured. Another responds. The master listens, clarifies, and occasionally redirects the discussion toward the question that matters. There is no need to imagine a loud contest. Even disagreement can be methodical. The aim is not to perform outrage. The aim is to understand whether an argument holds. The habits trained here have practical value. A notary drawing up a document must be precise. A person serving a church institution or civic administration must recognize the consequences of wording. A legal advisor must understand that a dispute often turns on details. The afternoon discussion is therefore connected to streets, archives, courts, contracts, privileges, and the slow machinery of communal life. It is not detached from the town outside. It is one of the ways the town learns to describe itself. The master may lead the students through layers of response. First, state the apparent problem. Then separate what seems similar but is not identical. Then consider an authority. Then test the result against another case. The progression is steady enough that the mind can rest inside it. Our student listens more than he speaks. This too is part of learning. Participation does not require constant display. He watches how a more experienced student frames a distinction. He notices how quickly a weak point becomes visible when placed beside a stronger one. He adds a note in the margin, this time more legible than the hurried line from morning. A quill pauses above the page while the speaker finishes. Ink gathers at the point. The student touches the pen lightly to the edge of the inkwell, then returns to the line. Outside, the afternoon continues. A person passes beneath the portico carrying a basket. Another stops to speak in the shade. From the roadway comes the slow, uneven sound of wheels. The argument does not need to be perfectly resolved in order to be useful. Intellectual training often depends on learning where uncertainty remains. A student may leave with a clearer understanding of the problem and a better question than the one he carried in. The medieval classroom is not a machine for producing instant certainty. It is a place where a text is read carefully enough that its difficulties become visible. This matters because our image of the Middle Ages can become too flat if we are not careful. It is easy to picture inherited authorities being accepted without thought, yet the presence of commentaries, glosses, repetitions and disputations shows a culture of disciplined interpretation. Respect for an authoritative text did not prevent close examination. It gave examination a framework. The afternoon light inches across the floor. A student near the wall shifts to avoid glare on the page. Another rubs tired fingers together before returning to his notes. The master pauses for a drink. The room breathes. Even sustained concentration has small interruptions. When the discussion resumes, it returns to the passage rather than wandering away from it. There is a calm economy in the method. The text remains the anchor. Commentary branches outward, but it must find its way back. A student learns that an argument is not strengthened by complexity alone. It is strengthened by clarity, relevance, and the ability to distinguish one matter from another. The process resembles the visual structure of a manuscript page. At the centre is the inherited text. Around it gather glosses. In the wider margins, a reader may add a mark, a correction, a cross-reference, or a memory from a master's explanation. The page becomes an image of the afternoon itself, a centre held steady while many smaller paths approach it. At some point the discussion turns from the voice of one student to the voice of another. Their accents differ. One comes from a place beyond Bologna's walls. Another has crossed a greater distance. Within the room, the shared work of Latin and legal reasoning creates a temporary common ground. Their backgrounds remain real, but the text gives them something to examine together. This common ground is one reason the university town feels both local and international. The street outside belongs unmistakably to Bologna. Brick, porticoes, church bells, household smells, familiar routes. Inside the lesson, however, the gathering reaches beyond the town. Students bring the roads with them. They bring other cities, other regions, and the expectation that what they learn may travel again when they leave. A conclusion is offered, then qualified. The master gathers the discussion with a few final remarks. There is no applause. Pages close softly. Notes are checked. A student asks a quieter question near the front after the others begin to stand. The intellectual energy does not vanish, but it disperses. Our student remains seated for a moment. The marginal note beside the morning passage is fuller now. It has become less like a reminder and more like a small piece of understanding. He may not remember every point in the order it appeared, but he carries a method. Return to the text, identify the difficulty, distinguish carefully, and avoid rushing toward a conclusion before the words have been heard. As he steps outside, the afternoon has softened. The portico receives a different light than it did at noon. Shadows from the columns have lengthened. The market continues, but the day has begun its gradual turn toward evening. Somewhere ahead, students concerned with other kinds of texts are moving through the same streets. Bologna is famous for law. but by the later 13th century its world of learning has become broader than a single discipline. To understand the university town more fully, we walk westward through the afternoon. The route does not lead away from law so much as beyond its most familiar rooms. Bologna's reputation as a centre of civil and canon law remains strong. The study of legal texts has helped shape its identity for generations. Yet a living studium changes. Other forms of learning gather around it, develop their own associations, and claim a place in the city. Toward the end of the 13th century, students of rhetoric, notarial studies, medicine, and philosophy formed an independent university of artists. Their assemblies could be held in the convent of the Basilica of St. Francis. The detail helps us imagine the city more accurately. The intellectual landscape is not contained in one building. It stretches across neighbourhoods and institutions, from the spaces associated with jurists to the western part of Bologna where other students organise themselves. The walk passes walls warmed by the afternoon, porticoes broken occasionally by an open space, and shops continuing their ordinary business. A student of law may share the walkway with someone studying the arts. A notary moves with the practical attentiveness of a person accustomed to written detail. A medical student carries a text shaped by inherited authorities and observation. A teacher of rhetoric thinks about language not only as decoration, but as a working instrument. Notaries belong naturally in a medieval commune. A town produces documents because a town produces relationships. Property changes hands, agreements are made, debts are recorded, wills, contracts, acts, privileges, and civic records require forms that can endure beyond a spoken moment. A trained notary understands how to shape written language so that it carries authority and clarity. The work is practical, but it is also cultural. A commune that depends increasingly on records depends on people who know how to write them. In Bologna, notarial study therefore connects learning directly to the streets. The document prepared in a careful hand may concern a household, a workshop, an inheritance, a commercial arrangement, or a civic decision. Ink turns memory into record. Formula and precision create continuity between people who may not stand in the same room again. The notary's work offers a useful counterpoint to the manuscript copyist's work. Both sit with ink and page, but their tasks are not the same. A copyist transmits a text that already exists, seeking fidelity to an exemplar. A notary gives durable written form to a present act. He records what people have agreed, acknowledged, witnessed, transferred, owed, or decided. His page is a bridge between a moment and the future need to remember that moment accurately. In a commune, records accumulate. One document joins another. The life of the city leaves written traces. Property arrangements, civic decisions, private agreements, appointments, obligations, and the careful language that allows an action to be recognized beyond the room where it occurred. The archive is not yet the quiet modern reading room we might imagine. It begins as a practical necessity. Papers exist because people expect words to continue working after the speakers have gone home. Training for such work asks for more than attractive handwriting. A notary must know forms, conventions, and the significance of particular wording. He must understand when names, witnesses, dates, places, and conditions matter. He must recognize the difference between language that merely sounds complete and language that performs its task. The discipline rewards care. Rhetoric sits nearby, not as a separate ornament, but as another way of attending to language. A phrase can persuade, clarify, obscure, or preserve. The arrangement of words affects how a letter is received and how an argument is remembered. In the hands of a student, rhetoric can become a practical art of civic life as well as a learned field. The arts and philosophy provide another foundation. Grammar trains attention to language. Logic trains attention to reasoning. Other inherited subjects place the student within a broad intellectual tradition. The categories do not align perfectly with the departments of a modern university, and we should resist forcing them into modern shapes. Their value in our walk lies in the way they widen the town's atmosphere. Bologna is not only a place where laws are studied, it is a place where words, arguments, records, bodies and the natural world are approached through multiple traditions of learning. Rhetoric also belongs to this written and spoken world. To study rhetoric is to attend to the way language is arranged, how an argument moves, how a phrase persuades, and how form shapes meaning. A student trained in rhetoric may bring that knowledge toward letters, public life, documents, or teaching. The discipline reminds us that words have texture. The same idea expressed carelessly and expressed clearly does not enter the world in the same way. Philosophy widens the field still further. Its questions can be broad, but the work remains anchored in texts, commentaries, and habits of reasoning. Students encounter inherited authorities and learn methods for approaching difficult questions. The atmosphere need not be grand. Picture a room with daylight falling across a page, a voice explaining a distinction, and listeners following a line of thought as carefully as the jurists followed law earlier in the day. Medicine asks for its own careful treatment. By around the year 1200, medicine and philosophy or liberal arts had taken a place at Bologna alongside the older legal studies. Medical learning in the medieval world drew on inherited texts, commentaries, observation, and a body of practical traditions. Its ideas do not map neatly onto modern medicine, and we should not pretend that they do. Yet neither should we reduce the subject to caricature. Students and teachers were trying, within the knowledge available to them, to understand the body, health, environment, diet, and remedies. For our quiet afternoon, there is no need to dwell on anything graphic. It is enough to pass a room where a medical text lies open, to imagine a teacher discussing an authority, and to notice the overlap between study and everyday life. Health is not an abstract issue in a medieval town. It appears in the household, the marketplace, the seasonal rhythm of food, the work of practitioners, and the concerns carried quietly by families. A medical lesson might lead the mind toward balance, regimen, environment, diet, rest, and the interpretation of signs described in inherited works. Students encountered a body of learning shaped by Greek, Roman, Arabic, and later Latin traditions transmitted across languages and regions. Those traditions did not produce a single uniform practice. They offered texts and frameworks that teachers and practitioners interpreted within local circumstances. The path by which knowledge reached Bologna is part of the atmosphere even when it remains invisible. A manuscript may preserve ideas that travelled through translation. A technical term may carry the memory of another language. A student seated in an Italian town can therefore be connected through the page to intellectual exchanges far beyond the streets he walks each morning. Philosophy has a similar reach. Questions about nature, causation, language, knowledge, and reasoning draw readers toward authorities whose works have crossed long distances in time and place. The student does not need to solve those questions in one afternoon. He learns how to enter them without losing the thread. The arts provide habits that make such study possible. Grammar, logic, and rhetoric train different forms of attention. Grammar asks how language is structured. Logic asks how reasoning holds together. Rhetoric asks how meaning is shaped for an audience. Their boundaries and curricula vary across institutions and periods, but together they remind us that a medieval education is concerned not only with what to think, but with how to read, argue, and express. Seen from the street, these disciplines leave few obvious marks. There is no sign over every doorway explaining which subject is being considered inside. Yet the town's intellectual variety can be sensed in its movement. One student carrying a legal text, another preparing a document, another approaching an inherited medical authority, another practicing the forms of language that will be useful in civic or scholarly life. Bologna holds them together without making them identical. A medical student may need the same kinds of support as a law student: lodging, food, pages, ink, instruction, companions, and time. He may also move through some of the same covered streets. This is one of the pleasures of imagining Bologna as an urban university. Different disciplines share the town even when they gather in different associations and rooms. The Basilica of St. Francis appears along the route not as a dramatic destination, but as a stable point in the city's geography. Religious institutions are woven into the life of the town. Their buildings can carry more than one function across a day or week. The artists' assemblies held in the convent remind us that a medieval city continually repurposes space. Architecture serves worship, community, administration, gathering, and memory according to need. The western light settles across brick and stone. A comparison with other medieval universities can help us avoid turning Bologna into a universal model. Paris became especially renowned for theology and developed around a different balance of masters, schools, and disciplines. Oxford grew in its own way. Teaching existed there by the late 11th century, and its early colleges later emerged from endowed houses or medieval halls of residence. Bologna's student-led associations, its great legal reputation, and its integration into the commune give it a distinct texture. These differences matter because history becomes more interesting when it remains specific. There is no single medieval student who can stand for everyone. A law student in Bologna, a theology student in Paris, and an art student in Oxford might share certain features of medieval learning while living within different institutions, streets, and customs. Even within Bologna, means and experience vary widely. One student arrives with money and servants, another lives cautiously, one seeks a licentia docendi, permission to teach, another studies for a shorter time and returns to duties elsewhere. Our unnamed observer remains a law student because that thread has carried the day so far. But the walk beyond law changes his perspective. The town contains more books than the book he opened at dawn. It contains more questions than the question discussed in the afternoon. One room is concerned with legal interpretation, another with the craft of documents, another with language, another with inherited ideas about nature, reasoning, or health. The connection among them is not uniformity. It is a patient confidence that difficult things can be studied. The portico opens briefly onto a space where voices gather and separate. Students stand in small groups before moving on. The day's heat has never become oppressive beneath the covered walkways. A faint trace of earlier rain remains in the darkened edges of stone. Somewhere nearby, a stationer may be counting what must be returned. Somewhere a notary continues over a page, aware that a missing word can matter. A bell marks the passing hour. By now, fatigue has softened the student's attention. The morning began in a small room before sunrise. It carried him through bread ovens, arcades, a lectura, a stationer's shop, a meal, and an afternoon of reasoning. The widening intellectual map is welcome, but evening is approaching. Before the town settles, one more layer of university life comes into view. The meetings and negotiations that help strangers live and study together. Under a cloister, or within a borrowed room, the voices are calm. A few students have gathered with representatives from their associations. The meeting is not a grand assembly of everyone in Bologna. It is a smaller part of a larger structure, one ordinary act of organisation among many. A concern about lodging has been raised. Someone has a question about a fee. Another wishes to know how a rule applies. Notes may be kept. People listen. The practical work of community proceeds without ceremony. Foreign students needed these forms of support because they occupied an unusual position in the town. They came to Bologna for teachers, texts, and reputation, but they did not arrive as local citizens with established families and familiar protections. Some were outsiders from other Italian regions. Others had crossed the mountains from farther away. The term foreign could therefore stretch across several kinds of distance. To live far from home is to encounter questions that residents scarcely notice. Which landlord can be trusted? What price is reasonable? Who can help when a disagreement begins? Which customs are local? Where should a student go when he needs a witness, an introduction, or advice? How can companions respond if one of them is treated unfairly? A new arrival does not want to solve each problem alone. The nations offered mutual support based on origin. Their names and structures evolved, but the principle is easy to understand. In an unfamiliar place, people gather around shared points of recognition. They speak in ways that feel known. They exchange warnings and recommendations. They provide a measure of security. They turn a strange town into a place that can gradually be navigated. At Bologna, student associations grew in influence. By the early 13th century, nations had joined into larger universitates with statutes and a role in city affairs. Two broad groupings appear clearly in the university's official history: the Tramontani, non-Bolognese Italians, and the Ultramontani, students from beyond the mountains. Their assemblies used religious spaces suited to gathering. They elected rectors from among the students, supported by representatives and a wider body of scholars. The student rector is one of the most distinctive features of Bologna's medieval organisation. The associations do not need to be imagined as abstract bureaucracies. They are made from people who recognise one another in streets, rooms, and assemblies. A new student hears where companions from his region tend to gather. A more experienced one knows whom to approach when a problem arises. Representatives carry concerns upward. A rector gives the larger body a voice when dealing with the city and with the practical administration of study. Rules can sound dry when listed from a distance, but in a university town they shape the texture of an ordinary week. They help determine when lectures begin, what obligations a teacher accepts, how attendance is understood, where an assembly gathers, and how disputes are handled. A student who benefits from such rules may rarely pause to admire them. Their achievement is that they make the day more predictable. Predictability matters far from home. A traveller cannot control weather, roads, prices, or every mood of the town around him. He can, however, take comfort in known arrangements. There is a time for the lectura. There is a process for a question. There are companions who understand the city. There are representatives who can listen. There are places where a larger group can assemble when needed. Bologna's student organisation also reveals something about the meaning of the word universitas. The university begins not as a landscape but as a collective. Its reality lies in relationship and recognition. Buildings matter because people use them. Statutes matter because people agree to be bound by them. A rector matters because others allow him to represent shared interests. The university is visible only in fragments, yet those fragments are joined by a social structure strong enough to endure. For a modern listener, the idea may feel surprising. We often picture a university as something administered above the students, through layers of permanent officials. In 13th century Bologna, student corporations had meaningful authority. A rector could represent values at city meetings, manage administration, and preside over aspects of the university's legal system. Students were not merely recipients of education. Their collective presence shaped the rules under which education took place. This power rested partly on a practical fact. Students could leave. A town that attracted scholars benefited from their presence. They rented rooms, purchased food, hired services, obtained texts, employed copyists, and added to Bologna's reputation. If conditions became intolerable, their departure mattered. The relationship between students and commune therefore required negotiation. Neither side existed in isolation. The city had interests. The scholars had interests. The university grew in the space where those interests were managed. We do not need to make the relationship sound either perfectly peaceful or constantly troubled. Town and gown friction existed in medieval university towns, as it has in later centuries. Visitors could be inconvenient. Residents could take advantage. Students could behave poorly. Rules developed because ordinary human beings do not always agree. Yet daily life depended far more often on workable accommodation than on dramatic confrontation. Picture the meeting returning to a modest concern. A representative explains a lodging issue. Another student clarifies what he has heard. Someone proposes speaking with the appropriate person. The rector or local leader listens. There is no reason to rush. The solution may involve conversation rather than spectacle. The tone belongs to administration, careful, mildly weary and necessary. The regulation of teaching also reflects this growing structure. Lectures were organized at set hours. Attendance mattered. Repeticiones and public questions gave study a rhythm. The relationship between students and teachers became more formal than the earliest private arrangements. Over time, professors formed their own colleges and negotiated their place within the institution. Bologna's university did not remain fixed. It adjusted as authority moved and new needs emerged. For students pursuing an academic path, the licentia docendi, the permission to teach, carried particular importance. In 1219, Pope Honorius III placed the granting of this license under the authority of Bologna's archdeacon. Later in the century, the process included examination by Bolognese professors and a formal cathedral ceremony. The new doctor received symbols of rank, a ring, a cap, and a book. In 1291, Pope Nicholas IV declared the title universally valid, allowing graduates of Bologna to teach elsewhere. Our student is not receiving that title today. His afternoon ends more quietly, yet the possibility exists in the distance, like one of the towers visible between roofs. Perhaps he seeks the license one day. Perhaps he does not. Many students did not need to complete a doctorate. The formal title was especially important for those who wished to teach. Others might study for a period, gain useful knowledge, and carry it into responsibilities elsewhere. Still, the image of the book offered during a doctoral ceremony is worth holding for a moment. A book has followed us through the day as a physical object, opened in the upper room, read during the lectura, surrounded by glosses, supported by the stationer's trade, and revisited during argument. In the ceremony, the book also becomes a symbol. It represents knowledge received, interpreted, and now entrusted to someone expected to pass it onward. Outside the meeting place, the light has changed. Voices under the portico are fewer than before. Merchants are beginning to think about closing. A craftsperson sets aside one tool and reaches for another task needed before night. The damp street reflects a little of the remaining sky. The town's towers stand in clearer relief as the colour drains gently from the day. The student steps away from the practical voices of negotiation. Behind him, the meeting continues or dissolves into smaller conversations. Ahead lies the familiar route home. Morning transformed the city from shadow into activity. Evening will reverse that movement more slowly. Shop fronts will narrow. Footsteps will thin. Bells will travel farther through quieter streets. The porticoes that sheltered business at midday will become corridors of dim brick, wood, and stone. And beneath them, the student begins his walk back toward the rented upper room. Evening arrives in Bologna gradually, collecting first beneath the porticoes. The sky above the roofs still holds colour, but the covered walkways have already begun to deepen into shadow. During the brighter hours, the columns divided light into repeating bands. Now the spaces between them grow less distinct. Wood, brick, and stone settle into gentler tones. The sheltered path remains familiar, yet it no longer feels like the path of morning. The student does not need to hurry home. The day's formal work has loosened. Lessons have ended. The meeting beneath the cloister has dispersed. A question from the afternoon still rests somewhere in his thoughts, but it no longer demands immediate attention. He can walk beneath the arcade and let the town become visible again in ordinary fragments. A shopkeeper gathers goods from the edge of the walkway. Each item is moved inward with the practiced care of someone who has performed the same task through many seasons. A board is shifted, a cloth is folded, a shutter waits to be drawn closed. The day's transactions are counted not only in coins but in the wear of hands. The tiredness of feet and the satisfaction of objects return to their proper places. Farther along, a craftsperson cleans or stores tools. The workbench that felt active at noon becomes still. A final tapping sound crosses the street, followed by a pause long enough to reveal how quiet the neighbouring spaces have become. A cook tends what remains near a hearth. Steam reaches the colder air, carrying the mild comfort of food without needing to announce a feast. A porter takes one last load through the street and then disappears around a corner. Bologna's porticos are especially suited to this hour. They belong to the buildings that stand above and beside them, yet they remain available to the public moving below. This private-public character gives the covered walkways a peculiar intimacy. You walk beside the walls of households, close enough to hear a door or smell a hearth, while remaining part of the street. A person is neither entirely indoors nor entirely exposed to the open sky. The arcade offers a middle space where the town can breathe. A light rain begins again. It is not a storm. It arrives softly, first as an uncertain tapping beyond the outer edge of the portico, then as a steadier pattern on roof lines and open paving. The student hears it more clearly than he feels it. The columns keep most of the water away. Dampness gathers near the street. Dark patches spread across stone and earth. Reflections form briefly where the surface is smooth enough to hold them. The sound changes the town. Footsteps beneath the arcade become more distinct because people choose the shelter. Conversation shortens as residents turn toward doors. A cloak is drawn a little closer. A seller who hoped to remain open longer completes the last task and pulls goods inward. The rain makes no demands. It simply encourages Bologna to fold itself toward evening. Our student passes the stationer's shop. The morning scene has nearly disappeared. The page checked near the window is no longer visible. The packet collected by one customer has gone elsewhere. A shutter is partly closed. Through the remaining opening, a worker may be setting aside sheets, checking that a gathering has been returned, or arranging what will wait until tomorrow. The smell of paper, parchment, leather and ink is faint now, overtaken by rain and cooling air. The manuscript trade continues even when the shop closes. Somewhere a copyist may work a little longer while light permits. Somewhere a student unwraps borrowed pages. Somewhere a master reviews the place where the next morning's reading should begin. Yet the visible business of the street is ending. The stationer's threshold withdraws from the public world and becomes simply another darkened frontage beneath the arcade. The bakery is quieter as well. Its most intense work belonged to the hours before dawn. By evening, the ovens carry a different warmth, one that feels settled rather than expectant. Bread has travelled outward into households, shops and meals. A few loaves may remain. The smell has softened, but it still touches the sheltered walkway. Morning and evening meet briefly in that familiar trace. The student walks on. Above him, the upper stories remain close. In places, small signs of household life appear through openings or around doors. A glow kept modestly within a room, a voice calling to someone nearby, a vessel being moved, the brief scrape of furniture. Artificial light is precious enough that evening does not blaze into brightness. Lamps, candles and hearths create limited circles. Darkness is not eliminated. It is arranged around. That limited light changes the perception of distance. A tower visible in daylight becomes a single dark form. A church facade loses its detail while retaining its shape. The far end of a narrow portico recedes quickly into shadow, and the next pool of light feels farther away than it truly is. Familiar streets acquire a quiet spaciousness after the shops close. A bell sounds for the evening hour. It comes from a church the student passed earlier, or perhaps from one beyond the route he walked during the day. Bells belong to the town structure. They accompany worship and mark time. But they also enter the lives of people who are occupied with other things. A baker judging the progress of work, a merchant preparing to close, a household arranging a meal, a traveller measuring how much daylight remains, a student deciding whether his notes can wait until morning. The bell travels well through the rain. Its sound touches brick, timber, roofs, and open space. It enters the portico and seems to move column by column. The student hears the first notes clearly, then the later ones more softly as he turns into another street. For a few moments, Bologna feels joined by sound. People do not need to stand in the same square or share the same task. The bell passes through their separate rooms and routes. A group of students walks ahead. Their conversation has lost the concentration of the afternoon. One is returning to a lodging nearby. Another may continue farther. They exchange a final thought before separating. The city's international character is still present, but evening makes it less visible. Accents are heard in brief phrases, then absorbed into rain. Cloaks and shadows reduce difference to silhouettes moving beneath the same shelter. Our student remains a few steps behind. There is comfort in walking alone when the route has become familiar. The first days in a strange town require constant attention. A visitor watches corners, listens for directions, and worries about missing a turn. Over time, knowledge settles into the body. The feet understand where the walkway narrows. The hand knows where a cloak may brush a damp wall. The eye recognizes the column beside the lodging door before the mind names it. Bologna has become less strange without becoming ordinary. The towers still surprise when glimpsed from the right angle. The porticoes still create a sense of passage unlike an open roadway. The mixture of local residents and far-travelled students still gives the town a restless intelligence during the day. Yet the student can now move through it without treating every building as a puzzle. A place begins to feel inhabitable when small routes no longer need explanation. He crosses a wider opening where rain is harder to avoid. The moment outside the arcade is brief. Cool drops touch the cloak. The air feels cleaner and more exposed. Then the next covered stretch receives him. Footsteps change sound again as the surface shifts underfoot. The repeated motion is almost meditative. Shelter, open space, shelter, columns, doorway, wall, bell, rain, footstep. A resident stands near an entrance speaking with a neighbour. Their conversation is not meant for him, and he does not try to hear it. A child is called indoors. Somewhere a latch closes. The town does not fall asleep at once. It withdraws in increments. The student passes another church. A few people enter or leave. Religious life cannot be separated from the medieval town's daily rhythm, yet it does not need to become a dramatic centerpiece of our walk. It is present in bells, buildings, calendar, prayer, education, and institutions that offer space for assemblies. It is one of the structures through which people understand the passing day. A small lamp burns near a doorway. Its light reaches only a short distance, catching the edge of a wooden post and the rain beyond. The scene is modest, but the modesty matters. A medieval evening is not evenly illuminated. Vision narrows. Hearing grows more important. The mind attends to whatever lies close at hand. This narrowing prepares the student for the room above the shop. He thinks briefly of the letter waiting in the chest. He thinks of the passage discussed during the afternoon, and of the cleaner note he would like to add while the argument remains fresh. He thinks of food, warmth, and the relief of removing a damp cloak. None of these thoughts is urgent. Together they draw him home. The lodging door appears beneath the familiar arcade. He pauses before entering and looks once more along the street. In the grey-blue light, the columns seem to continue farther than they did in daylight. A few figures move between them. The stationer's shop has vanished into shadow behind him. The rain remains gentle. Beyond the roofs, towers stand against the last colour of the sky. Then the student steps inside. The stairway rises narrowly. Street sounds follow him at first. Rain, an occasional wheel, a voice fading at the corner. With each step they grow more muted. The household below is settling into evening. Warmth gathers differently inside the building. The upper room waits where he left it, small enough to feel immediately familiar. Outside, Bologna continues to close its shutters. Inside, the day contracts to a writing surface, a carefully tended flame, a book, and a folded letter from home. The first task is simple. The student removes his damp cloak and places it where it can dry. Water darkens the fabric in irregular patches. The shoes are set carefully aside. A small flame is trimmed or relit, Depending on what has been kept through the evening, the room does not become bright, it becomes legible. Candlelight or lamplight gathers around the writing surface and leaves the farthest corners quiet. The bed, chest, basin and shutters remain visible only in part. Shadows soften the room rather than making it threatening. After a day in the open city, the limited circle of light feels reassuring. It asks for only one thing at a time. The student unwraps the pages he carried home. A book in this setting is never merely background. Its physical presence shapes the way the evening proceeds. It must be positioned where the flame helps rather than harms. The writing surface must remain clear. Ink, if used, needs steadiness. A sleeve should not brush the page carelessly. The student's body remembers the practical discipline of reading by limited light. He returns to the marginal note from the morning. At dawn, the note was only a quick mark made while the master continued speaking. In the afternoon, the same passage opened into a longer discussion. Now, in the upper room, the student gives the thought a final small measure of attention. He does not begin an ambitious project. Nighttime study has limits. Fuel costs money. Eyes tire. The day has already been full. He simply writes a clean line while the distinction remains close enough to recall. The pen moves slowly. Dip. Pause. Write. The sound is almost too soft to hear beneath the rain. Yet in the quiet room it becomes part of the night. A quill does not move with the speed of thought. It requires thought to accept a slower pace. Each word enters the page through a physical sequence. Choose, shape, check, continue. Outside the shutters, a few footsteps pass beneath the portico. They are fewer now and easier to distinguish. A person crosses quickly through the rain. Another stops near a doorway. Somewhere below, the household exchanges a final sentence before a door closes. The shop, if there is a shop, has withdrawn into darkness. The student is close to others but enclosed within his own small circle of work. This is where the day's many spaces come together. The line he writes belongs to the lesson room. The page belongs to the stationer's economy and the copyist's craft. The light belongs to the household and the fuel that someone purchased. The room belongs to a landlord or family whose income is tied in part to the arrival of scholars. The quiet protection he feels in a strange town is strengthened by companions, nations, and the wider university associations that grew around students far from home. Nothing in the room is entirely isolated. Even solitude has a social structure. The student places the quill down for a moment and listens. Rain has become a softer background sound. The bell that marked evening is gone. No new bell replaces it immediately. Silence arrives in uneven layers, interrupted by the building's small noises, settling timber, a step on the stairs, the faint breath of air near the shutters, the nearly inaudible movement of flame. He reaches for the folded letter. The letter has waited all day. It was present before dawn when the room was cold and uncertain. It remained inside the chest while the student followed streets, texts, arguments, and conversations. Now it returns as the most personal object in the room. We do not need to know exactly who wrote it. It may come from a parent, a sibling, a friend, a colleague, or a household with practical questions and familiar concerns. Perhaps the writing mentions weather on the road, news from a town square, the condition of a field, a family matter, a person recovering from an ordinary illness, or someone asking when the student may return. Perhaps its tone is warm but unsentimental. Medieval letters, like modern ones, could carry both affection and errands. The student unfolds the sheet carefully. The handwriting differs from the controlled text of the manuscript. It belongs to a known person or to a scribe who has preserved that person's words. The page brings another place into Bologna. For a few moments the upper room contains two towns, the learned brick city outside the shutters and the remembered home carried through ink. Distance feels different at night. During the day, Bologna offers continual evidence that the student belongs to a larger undertaking. Other scholars cross the porticoes, masters read, stationers work, meetings occur, bells and meals divide the hours. The town's energy holds loneliness at a distance. At night, the road home becomes easier to imagine. It passes beyond the walls, through landscapes darkened now beneath the same sky, toward places where other people are also closing shutters and lowering lamps. The feeling is not despair. It is gentler than that. A person can miss home without wishing to abandon the path that led away from it. The student may understand the privilege of being in Bologna. He may feel grateful for the text open before him, for the chance to listen to a respected teacher, for the association that helps him navigate an unfamiliar commune, and for the promise that knowledge gathered here may have use elsewhere. Gratitude does not erase distance. It makes the distance meaningful. He reads the letter once, then again more slowly. Perhaps he begins a reply. A clean sheet is placed near the light. The first lines do not need to be eloquent. He may say that he is well. He may mention the rain, the cost of something ordinary, a master's reading, or the arrival of a letter he was glad to receive. He may promise to write more fully another day. A reply does not need to contain the whole experience of Bologna. It only needs to cross the road home. That crossing will not be immediate. A letter depends on opportunity. It must be folded, entrusted, carried, and eventually placed into other hands. The student cannot watch its progress once it leaves Bologna. He cannot know the exact moment when it passes through a gate, rests during a journey, or reaches the place he's pictured by candlelight. Communication contains an interval of uncertainty. The interval shapes the way the letter is written. Questions may be answered after circumstances have already changed. News arrives with the softness of delay. A person learns to include what matters without expecting an instant reply. The written page holds patience inside it. This slowness does not make the relationship less real. It may heighten the attention given to each line. A familiar name written carefully can carry more weight when the next exchange lies weeks away. A small practical detail can become comforting simply because it belongs to home. Even the physical fold of the letter becomes recognizable after repeated reading. The student leaves space for another sentence, then decides the page has said enough for tonight. There will be time to add a final line before it begins its journey. For now, the unfinished letter can rest beside the manuscript. One reaches backward toward inherited lore, the other reaches outward toward living memory. Both depend on ink, but they ask the reader to inhabit different kinds of time. The quill moves again. The night deepens while the student writes a few lines. A word is reconsidered. The pen lifts. A small drop of ink is managed before it can spread. The page waits. The act of letter writing differs from note-taking even though the tools are the same. Notes compress. Letters reach outward. One preserves an argument. The other preserves a relationship. In the distance, a late sound moves through the street and disappears. The room is quiet enough that imagination can return to the day without forcing a formal summary. The student sees fragments. He remembers the cool paving beneath the morning portico and the warmth of bread passing into his hands, He remembers the way the master's voice settled into rhythm around a line of law. He remembers the stationer's shop where pages waited in various stages of completion. He remembers a copyist bending toward good light, hand moving with a patience that made the wider world of books possible. He remembers the midday room transformed by daylight, the ordinary meal and the folded letter left unopened. He remembers the afternoon argument not as a contest, but as a structure built carefully in speech. One student distinguished two ideas that had seemed alike. Another answer exposed a weakness without humiliation. The master guided the room back toward the text. A hurried marginal mark became clearer. The day added one small layer of understanding. He remembers walking westward toward the world of notaries, rhetoric, philosophy, and medicine. Different students followed different texts, but all depended on the town's patience with learning. He remembers the association meeting where scholarship became practical administration, lodging, rules, representatives, protection, and the quiet work of making a temporary home among strangers. And he remembers the return beneath the arcades. Rain touched the roadway. Shutters closed. Tools were set aside. The porticoes became darker and more intimate as their public life thinned. The same columns that had sheltered morning trade held evening shadow. The same bell that organized the day entered a town preparing to rest. These memories do not feel repetitive to the student because each belongs to a different hour. A place changes through time. Morning porticoes are not evening porticoes. A page heard aloud is not the same page reconsidered during an argument or copied by candlelight. A rented room before sunrise is not the same room after a long day outside. History becomes immersive when we allow a setting to change rather than treating it as a painted backdrop. The student adds one more sentence to the letter. He may not send it tomorrow. The ink needs to dry. Perhaps the wording will be adjusted. Perhaps another practical detail must be included. The important thing is that the road home has been acknowledged. Distance has been given a shape small enough to fold. The manuscript remains open beside the letter. A central passage lies within a field of commentary. The page is visually crowded, but the room around it is sparse. This contrast belongs to the life of study. A modest room can contain a large intellectual world. A narrow writing surface can support ideas carried across centuries. A single candle can illuminate only a portion of a page, yet the student does not need more than that portion tonight. His work belongs to a chain longer than he can see. Someone prepared the writing surface. Someone copied the text. Other readers added glosses or preserved commentary. A master read the passage aloud. Students carried it into discussion. One of them now copies a clarification in an upper room while rain passes through a medieval town. Later, the knowledge may travel again. The student may return home. He may serve an institution, prepare documents, advise others, or teach. He may simply remember the discipline of careful reading when confronted by a difficult question years from now. The future does not need to be decided tonight. The student closes the manuscript or gathers the loose pages together. The movement is deliberate. A protective wrapping is returned. Notes are placed where they will be found in the morning. The ink on the letter is checked. The quill is cleaned or set aside. The small writing surface, active for a few minutes, becomes still. The flame is lowered but not yet extinguished. For a little while, the student sits without reading. There is a form of rest that begins before sleep. It begins when a day no longer asks to be improved. The room is not perfectly warm. The cloak still needs to dry. Tomorrow will contain its own lessons, errands, and questions, yet nothing remains urgent. The work completed tonight is enough. Outside, Bologna has become a town of partial sounds. A final traveller passes beneath the portico. Rainwater falls from an edge at regular intervals. Somewhere a horse moves in a stable. A distant door closes. The towers stand unseen except as darker shapes against the night. The street that felt full at noon now belongs mostly to shadow, stone, wood, and weather. The student places the folded letter near the chest or beside the book. Its journey has not begun, but its purpose is already real. It holds a few lines sent mentally toward another place. It reminds him that the world beyond Bologna continues quietly, just as Bologna continues beyond the room. He prepares for sleep. The blanket is drawn back. Shoes remain by the bed. The basin catches almost no light now. The page, the quill, and the letter rest together on the writing surface. The candle flame becomes smaller. Before it is extinguished, it reveals the room one last time. The edge of the chest, the folded cloak, the shutters, the rough wall, the book that carried an ancient text through the day, and the letter that carries a living voice toward home. Then the flame disappears. The room does not become empty. It simply enters the deeper quiet of night. Above Bologna, the roofs have settled into darkness. A few lights remain, scattered and modest. They do not outline every street. They do not turn night into day. They glow behind a shutter, near a doorway, within a religious building, or beside the work of someone whose evening has not yet ended. Between them lie broad stretches of shadow. The towers are still there, though their brick has vanished from view. They rise as dark shapes into the night sky. The porticos continue beneath the houses, their columns repeating through streets that have become almost empty. Rain touches the open paving, runs from roof edges, and gathers briefly in shallow places before finding its way onward. Somewhere beneath those arcades, bread has cooled after the long work of the ovens. Somewhere tools rest on a bench until morning. The stationer's shutters are closed. Gatherings of pages wait in their proper places. A copied line dries in a room we never entered. A master's text lies ready for the next lecturer. The rented teaching room has become ordinary again. Its bench is empty, its walls holding only the faint memory of voices. The day has shown us a university that cannot be contained within a single building. It existed in movement. It existed in the student descending a narrow stair before sunrise. It existed in the sheltered route beneath wood, brick, and stone. It existed in the baker's labour, the landlord's room, the seller's provisions, the stationer's shop, and the copyist's hand. It existed in the master reading a difficult passage slowly enough that others could follow. It existed in the margin where a student preserved one useful thought. It existed in the afternoon return to a question, in the patient distinction, and in the willingness to listen before answering. It existed in associations formed by people far from home. A student arriving in Bologna did not leave distance behind when he entered the town. He carried it through the gates and beneath the arcades. The Naciones and larger student universities helped turn that distance into a community. They offered support, representation, and some measure of protection. Their rectors and assemblies remind us that medieval students were not simply passive figures seated beneath a master's voice. At Bologna, they helped shape the institution that shaped them. It existed, too, in the variety of learning gathered through the city. Law gave Bologna much of its early fame. Civil and canon law drew mature students toward respected masters and inherited texts. Yet the later 13th century town also held the work of notaries, rhetoricians, philosophers, and medical students. Different books rested on different writing surfaces. Different questions moved through different rooms. The same bells marked their hours. Now those hours have ended. The student in the upper room is asleep or nearly asleep. The book has been set aside. The letter rests folded nearby. The clarification written by candlelight can wait until morning to be read again. Nothing will be lost by allowing the night to remain quiet. Beyond the shutters, Bologna keeps its patient rhythm. The rain may continue for a little longer. It may stop before dawn. Either way, the streets will gradually dry or darken according to the weather. The ovens will warm again. Doors will open. Shutters will swing outward beneath the porticoes. Cellars will arrange their spaces. Bells will cross the roofs. Students will emerge from rented rooms carrying books, notes, questions, and private thoughts. The master will return to the text. A stationer will check a page. A copyist will place a hand beside a line and begin again. But those things belong to another day. For now, the town can remain exactly as it is. Brick walls cooled by rain, towers resting against the night, covered walkways empty enough for every footstep to be heard, and one small room holding the quiet traces of study. There is nothing more you need to follow. The bells have faded. The candle is out. The book is closed. Thank you for spending this slow day in medieval Bologna. Sleep well, and good night.
Thank you for watching Something About Sleep. Since you're clearly still awake, why don't you click on the next video and we'll see you there.